So today's session number 1, as I said, is focused on staff wellbeing. We have 3 wonderful speakers joining me today, 2 of which are already here and 1 who is due to join us in about 15 minutes. She is busy having a strategic meeting about the upcoming election. So very, very grateful that she is making time for us in amongst all of the excitement that is going on beyond us in the sector. Yeah, let me introduce the speakers. If you can just give a quick wave, I won't ask you to kind of do a full intro, just so we can get into the meat of it as quickly as possible. But we have Jonny Uttley with us, who Jonny, give us a wave, thank you. Jonny is the author of Putting Staff First, and is the CEO of the Education Alliance. You may already be familiar with him. He is quite a champion for staff wellbeing and for kind of the importance of looking after your staff in order to ensure a kind of high quality of education. And then we also have Sufian Sadiq with us. Sufian, if you can give us a wave. Sufian is the director of the teaching school and talent at, apologies, that's fallen off, at the Children Learning Trust. And Sufian is a real advocate for matters relating to diversity, equity and inclusion, and for championing kind of career pathways, leadership, development and so on. And Emma Sheppard, who will be joining us shortly when she's finished with her election arrangements. She is the founder of MTPT, which is Maternity Teacher, Paternity Teacher project. Emma started as a teacher and found whilst she was on maternity leave that the notion of returning to the teaching profession was not going to work for her, and so has kept her kind of passion for education alive by staying within the sector, stepping outside of a teaching role and looking at how we can build a better environment for working parents. And then you have me. I'm the head of insights at Edurio, and I work on our national analysis, understanding kind of what is the kind of big picture of what's going on within the sector. And what we're going to do today is effectively, I will share a load of data and I will kind of set the scene for a discussion, and then the other 3 panelists will kind of share their reflections on the data and consider what we can do about it moving forwards. So just before I start on the data, I'll run through kind of what exactly we'll go through. I'll share a kind of overall picture of staff wellbeing, and then we'll have a look at staff wellbeing by role. Then I'll kind of stop presenting and we'll come and have a bit of a discussion around it between me and the 3 panelists. And then I'll come back to share some more data that looks at wellbeing by protected characteristics. There's 3 protected characteristics we're going to focus on, but the report covers more than that. But we're picking just 3 of them this time in the interest of time, and then we'll have a discussion to wrap up this session. A little bit about the survey itself. So the survey covers pretty broad range of topics relating to the staff experience, and wellbeing is a little bit interesting, and I'll explain that in a moment. But the kind of 3 broad buckets of the survey are a look at relationships, so interactions between staff and other staff, between staff and line managers and leadership, and how those relationships kind of across the trust and across the school and wider organisation are working for the staff members. And then we have a look at working conditions, which spans from things like pay and benefits to pupil behaviour, and takes a look at the kind of underlying features of the environment that staff are working in. And then we have wellbeing, which is quite an interesting area because the other 2 that I've spoken about are very, very school specific and trust specific. We're looking at specific elements of what it's like to be in that school, whereas wellbeing takes a bit of a broader look. It is obviously still very wrapped up in their kind of working life because your job has such a strong relationship with your wellbeing. But actually it does go beyond that. We look at things like sleep quality, stress levels and so on, which are going to be influenced by and will influence your kind of day-to-day working life, but also kind of span a bit beyond that. Just as the final thing before I actually start telling you some data, this is coming from our latest report that looks at wellbeing. So over the first half of this year, from September to March, we gathered around 30,000 staff voices across England, and that has formed the basis of this report, which came out just a few weeks ago, and unveils kind of new data on wellbeing within the sector. So as I said, we'll start with a section on overall staff wellbeing and wellbeing by role. It may not surprise you to hear that it's not an overwhelmingly positive picture. So we found that less than 4 in 10 staff, so only 38% of staff reported that they feel very or quite well. A reasonable proportion reported that they feel moderately well, but I'm challenging here that we should be striving for a little bit more than moderately well. And over a quarter reported that they feel not very well or not well at all. In addition to that, we have a similar proportion. So we have a third of staff reporting that they are only sleeping very or quite well lately. So you have 1/3 of staff sleeping well, 1/3 of staff sleeping moderately well, and a further third who are not sleeping very well or not sleeping well at all. And at the same time, around half of staff, 47% of staff, report feeling stressed very or quite often, and a further 40% report that they feel stressed sometimes. You can see here only 2% of staff report that they never feel stressed. And a similar proportion, 49% of staff say that they feel overworked very or quite often, and again only 2% of staff say that they feel overworked never. And then a slightly more positive picture, we see that more than half of staff say that they feel excited by the work that they do. So 57% of staff say that they feel excited very or quite often, and another 34% say that they feel excited at least some of the time. Only 9% of staff say that they rarely or never feel excited by the work that they do. And we've included this even though it's not as clearly a wellbeing measure as some of the other data points that I've just shown you. We thought this was a really important thing to have a look at because that sense of purpose has such a strong kind of relationship with wellbeing, and is such a kind of it's a more positive element of wellbeing that we felt it was really important that we share that data as part of this exercise. So that's kind of the overall picture, and just as a very brief summary of that, we can see that staff are feeling overworked, they're feeling stressed, and they're sleeping poorly. But as I just shared, most of them do feel excited by the work that they do. And now let's have a quick look at how that plays out by looking at staff with different roles. And this, I think, has some really, really interesting patterns. It came as a little bit of a surprise to us. So what we can see is that those in a leadership position report the highest levels of wellbeing, and teachers report the lowest levels of wellbeing. Only 32% of teaching staff report that they feel well, very or quite well, whereas a much larger proportion of leadership staff report the same. What I'm going to do as I flick through these charts and as I flick through the later charts, I'm not going to dwell on every single data point, but I encourage you just to have a look at the kind of green bars and the position of the roles. The way that we're ordering these charts is in the order that they come in this question. So as I flick through, you'll see leadership, other roles, administrative staff, teaching assistants and teachers in this order, so that you can see how the kind of pattern emerges as we look at the different metrics. So as I say, leadership, most positive, teachers, least positive when it comes to overall levels of wellbeing. Similar pattern when we look at sleep quality, so leadership reporting the highest levels of sleep quality, teachers reporting the lowest levels of sleep quality, and all of the other roles, the kind of ranking of quality of sleep is the same for overall wellbeing as it is for sleep. But that changes when we look at stress levels. So As you see here, this pattern is quite sort of similar to the first one, whereas when we look at stress, we can see that actually leadership are the second most stressed group. Teachers remain the kind of the group with the lowest well-being when we look at it through the lens of stress, but leadership have jumped up and are second highest when it comes to levels of stress. And you can see here, if we look at the green bars, there's only 9% of teachers who rarely or never feel stressed, and 15% of leadership who rarely or never feel stressed. Same when it comes for being overworked. Again, teachers the least positive. Leadership are much less positive than other roles, despite having that kind of overall higher levels of well-being. And then finally, looking at how excited staff feel by the work that they do. This again shows leadership being the most positive. But what I think is interesting here is that this is the only area in this kind of well-being bunch where teachers are not the least positive. So they're not kind of overwhelmingly positive, but having gone through all of these and seen kind of teachers sort of languishing at the bottom as kind of the least positive, least well, and so on, to see that they're not the least positive when we look at how excited they feel by the work that they do, I think is very noteworthy. And just kind of summarising that before we go to the discussion, as I've just said, kind of teachers have the worst wellbeing across all groups. Leaders are stressed and they are overworked, but actually they report overall reasonable well-being. With that, I'm going to stop presenting data for just a moment, and we will come to a group discussion. I understand that Emma has now arrived, so Emma, welcome. Yeah, Emma's giving us a good wave. Hello. I let everyone know that you were off doing very important things, so we're thrilled to have you join us. If I can start with you, Emma. So I've just talked through kind of the overall data and the data looking at roles. And I know that you had started out as a teacher and then you had made the decision that wasn't actually working for you anymore. Could you share with us a little bit around your kind of personal reflections on the data, how much that kind of resonates with you, and a little bit about your personal journey and why you ended up leaving teaching?
100%. I'll start with a little bit of a correction, Iona, if you allow me to. It's not that it wasn't working, it's that my husband is French and we had the opportunity to move to France. I actually left teaching very reluctantly, but that within itself, I was incredibly happy in the work that I was doing. I was very satisfied with my job, but unfortunately personal circumstances mean that we agreed that we wouldn't live in England forever, him being French and my children being half French. But actually, just on that, so I was very happy as a teacher and a mother of two children, working 0.8 at the time that I was leaving, and balancing hybrid working, if you want, with the MTPT project, charity work. And so it feels like my particular circumstance of being with a French man and having that agreement of internationality is very specific. But actually, in some of the studies, well, the study that we've done around women leaving the classroom aged 30 to 39, amongst 60% of our participants, there was what we're describing as the spousal influence. And of that, to sort of encouraging or us having some influence in them leaving. And of our participants, 11% of them spoke specifically about a spousal relocation of their work that contributed to them leaving the profession. So like me, my husband's job, relocating back to France. So if we're actually scaling that up as a personal circumstances, we could be talking about 1,000 women leaving the profession every year, aged 30 to 39, because of their husband's context or because of their husband's working, taking away, relocating them. But I think the Edurio study as survey has really given me a lot of reason to reflect on what we know already from the MTPT project community, some of our research, some of our anecdotal experiences, the literature on teacher wellbeing more generally, and some of the assumptions that we've got. So You know, Iona, that I was quite surprised to hear that parents are amongst or less stressed than non-parents, but it's really got me thinking about some of the
Emma, I haven't actually shown the parent data yet.
Oh,
that is coming soon.
I'll talk more specifically about that in a second then. My particular reflection around this is around the green bar and the orange bar, essentially, that we've already seen, and the subjectivity of self-reporting, especially in comparison of maybe the expectations that we have of teacher wellbeing in comparison to other industries. So I think it's really interesting that we're focusing on the green bars more than we're necessarily focusing on the green bars plus the orange bars, because this phrase moderately well, I think, is really worth looking at. So, for example, when we're focusing on the sort of well or the very well figures, we're not necessarily concentrating on those people who are like, yeah, fine, great, good, you know, whatever, everything's okay. And I wonder how much we expect our teachers to constantly be on a super high, rather than accepting that good enough is sometimes good enough. It's okay to be just okay. And actually, for some aspects of sustainability in a profession, pottering along at a general satisfied contentment is actually more sustainable than having the high highs and the low lows. So just as a comparison, there's a CIPD report. What's it called? It is called the Good Work Index. That actually, instead of asking workers whether they are excited about their job, it asks them whether they are satisfied in their job. And I think that's a really interesting one to look at. How much are we asking whether people are satisfied, moderate, okay, rather than demanding that teachers are 110% committed and excited by their work every single day, or very often, or always, you know? So I think that the wording around self-reported well-being is really interesting. And I don't want to minimize the challenges the teacher workforce are facing, but I think it's really important to pry into and understand the issues that are there, and also celebrate what is working, and maybe being okay or being moderately well in a very stressful profession arguably is a really good thing. And I think what has then come out of the data for me is actually the measures around stress and workload. So that 47% of staff feeling stressed very often or quite often. You know, sometimes feeling stressed is probably part of life, right? But very often or quite often is untenable and leads to burnout. And I think as well that stress being linked to the 48% of staff that are saying that quite often or very often they're feeling overworked. So something there about workload leading to stress. But I also wonder, we have a lot of top-down initiatives that talk about workload. You know, we've got the DFE workload toolkit, we have the work well charters, the wellbeing charters that schools employ. But we can sort of do all these top-down initiatives as much as we like, but how far are we actually empowering our individuals in schools to manage their own stress levels through things like effective boundary setting, saying no, resisting people-pleasing or perfectionist tendencies that tend to come with the teacher profile, better managing the emotional toll of their role through effective supervision and giving time for effective supervision and counselling and therapy packages, and actually enabling or giving colleagues the tools to communicate effectively to better understand expectations of their role. So actually being able to say, sorry, when you say this in reference to the marking policy, is this what you mean, or is this what you mean? Rather than just assuming they mean put red pen on every page and spend 4 hours marking a set of books. So I think there's something around how we're empowering individuals to manage their own stress levels, as well as what we're doing systemically from the top down in terms of this is how the organisation deals with workload or teacher wellbeing. I'll stop there.
Wonderful, thank you. And yeah, I think it is really important to check, as you say, is moderately okay. And I think as you pointed out with the overwork and with the stress question, I think that when we're seeing kind of half of staff feeling very or quite often stressed and overworked, I think that's when we're kind of looking at a challenge, and when we see such small numbers saying that they rarely or never feel stressed or overworked? Is kind of are we kind of creating a rod for our own back by hoping that everybody is always happy all of the time? But where's the kind of the right place to land? So thank you very much for those reflections. Sufian, I'd like to call you into the chat now, if I may. So you have kind of gone on a kind of leadership journey throughout your career. If we can have a quick think about the leadership data, how does that kind of sit with you, where you see kind of some areas where well-being of leaders is quite poor and more in line with the teachers, and other areas where actually you're leading the pack and the well-being is higher than every other group? How would you kind of rationalize that?
So I think it's looking at it in two different ways. If I was to kind of break it down, I think the well-being part, the difficulty and the narrative that we've got to get right there is, if teachers, and this would have been kind of typical industrial revolution, this idea when we first started looking at productivity and motivation with Henry Ford and Abraham Maslow's theory and Mayo and whatever it was, this disparity between leaders and workers on the shop floor, on the factory floor. Is that great news for us as a sector? Probably not. It's great news that the well-being of leaders is good, but the disparity means that there's an element of risk that we're running into, and that element of risk is around that human leadership. Is there genuine care, empathy, sympathy towards the folk at the chalk face of things, the ones on the factory floor? Is that empathy there? Do we understand what it's like to teach? And that notion, I think, is a fair one. Anyone who's stepped out of full-time teaching with a full timetable, and then as you kind of progress in teaching career, you get a bit more remission, a bit more TLR, a bit more responsibility, and your timetable reduces. And that disconnect that can occur between leaders and teachers is one that we should be worried about. We should be thinking about that human leadership of the best leaders are, and I like the fact that we, in schools, we have that role: head teacher, assistant head teacher, deputy head teacher. How much teaching are we doing? How much are we connected with the chalk face? How much are we connected with what that ECT is going through in year one, in year two? So I think there's that human leadership element that we've got to be mindful about. There's also the leaders being excited, and that's, you understand that again, if you're looking at kind of basic thing of job enrichment, job rotation, job enlargement. So what are the ways that you can make a job interesting for people, especially, again, going back to that really raw example of factory floor? So when people were on a factory floor in the Ford factory, the monotony was killing people. It was the one thing that was grinding people down. But what leaders had was a bit more autonomy, and they were able to get around and do different things. And what we knew to motivate people and to increase productivity, we understood that to make jobs a bit more enriching, to make them rotating, so giving them different things to do, and enlarging in some cases, giving people a slightly broader remit of things to do, allows people to start enjoying their job. So leaders are looking like they're more excited, and naturally they would be, because actually the firefighting days of when you're an assistant head or a deputy head, the day starts and the day ends, and you don't know where it's gone because a safeguarding issue has popped up, and at the same time you're trying to sort out cover, at the same time you're trying to make sure that the behavior routines and systems are on point. At the same time, you've got lesson reviews happening. And while all of that's happening, somebody else is teaching English to year 7 on repeat. going through the same text, the same lesson, the same, and because to an extent in some schools, we've taken the autonomy of teachers away as well, to the extent that we want standardized lessons and we want people to be looking at starter activities, and it has to be a retrieval strata for the first 5 minutes. Then we want them to start looking at working together. Then it's think, pair, share. Then it's a plenary at this time. We've monotonized it so much that it actually takes away from the excitement, the creativity. A teacher can predict what their day will look like. They can predict which children will flare up with a behavioral issue. And that monotony is what drives down productivity, decreases motivation. And for us as leaders, we've got to think, how do I get a bit of the magic that I'm getting, albeit it's overworking me? So we're seeing that next part. I'm overworked and I am stressed and I'm finding it hard. But I liken that overworked and stressed with leaders to a bit of a dopamine effect. I like the fact that when I go to the gym, I want to be overworked in the gym, but I get a bit of a kick of being overworked and stressed in a gym because I'm getting enjoyment from it. I'm getting benefit and I'm getting growth from that. And from a leadership perspective, to an extent, because of the variety and the varied nature of things, and because of the fact that you're able to impact the system and make changes and have positive impact, there is an element of you are overworked, but clearly the excitement element and the well-being shows that there's an element of there's that buzz and that adrenaline of I'm stressed, I've got a lot to do, but I'm making a difference. I'm changing things, I'm impacting things. And it's again trying to say, how do we get some of the magic that we're clearly seeing exist at this layer? How do we create a trickle down effect to make sure that we're sharing some of that magic? Because the disparity is what's creating now, not only people struggling to come into the profession, is creating a massive barrier around those who want to get out of the classroom as quickly as possible. So sometimes you're listening to leaders, young leaders, saying, I want to progress. Why? I want to teach less. Well, no, that's the last thing I want you to say. I don't want you to be a leader because you want to teach less, because actually the teaching is the joy. That's the bread and butter of our business. That's the core element. That's what we all want to be developing, crafting, and designing. And I think some of that is about our leaders teaching more, being a bit more on the chalk face, showing that empathy to the people in the ranks that we get it. We understand what it's like to be in the front of a classroom. And we have that in our trust with a lot of head teachers that choose to teach. We don't mandate it, but a lot of our head teachers choose to teach, because actually if you're involved in the craft and the pedagogy and the practice at the very top, you're understanding the nuances of the impact and the challenges that a teacher is facing. The moment your headquarters is somewhere from the factory floor, there's a disconnect. So I think it's interesting. I wasn't probably expecting the level of well-being and excitement in leaders, and to see teaching staff right at the bottom, to see even support staff feeling the way they do. But I think the disparity for us as leaders should be worrying, because we don't want that disparity. We're getting something wrong. Of course, we want to enjoy our jobs. And of course, we want to be excited by our jobs, but not at the expense of the folk that we rely so heavily on, not feeling the same way as us. And that ivory tower kind of effect that this might be creating is not good for the profession.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. And I think I had a conversation earlier this week with Liz Robinson from Big Education Trust, and she was thinking specifically about that kind of sense of purpose and overwork, and sort of gave the hypothesis that these feelings of overwork are heavily impacted by feeling like you're doing a lot of work that you don't know why you're doing it. or that you don't believe in, and if it was kind of that same level of work on stuff that you were kind of fully bought into. And like Emma, you mentioned about the kind of red penning, is that what people are thinking of when they're thinking about feeling overworked, rather than that sort of might be more stressful, might be more challenging conversation they're having with a pupil, but that they can see the immediate benefit of having done so. Jonny, I think it's time we get you involved in the conversation. So you've obviously spent a huge amount of time thinking about staff wellbeing, teacher wellbeing. You're a leader, and you've obviously also been thinking about your own wellbeing. Can you share a little bit of your reflections? I think if we spend more time again speaking about the kind of teacher and leader as a focus, but beyond that to every kind of member of school staff, are there any actions you recommend schools can take that would help improve the wellbeing, particularly of teachers, but of all staff in the organisation?
Yeah, thank you. It's a real pleasure to be involved today. I am a little bit gutted because Emma and Sufian have said such great stuff. I had made a few notes and I've just been crossing off as I've been going through. And then, as if to finish me off completely, I was going to talk about Daniel Pink, and then Lee Rogers has put it in the chat. So I might go over some old ground here, but bear with me. Yeah, I certainly concur with everything that's been said so far. I think on that issue of workload in particular that you just mentioned there, Iona, that you were talking to Liz Robinson about, there is a very, very clear distinction between whether we're talking about perception of workload or actual workload. And the driver and the thing that leaders need to be mindful of and attempt to control or improve is that perception bit. And it does come down to kind of the importance of the work and the motivation and so on. So if you look at the survey, you know, the encouraging thing, the thing that we cling to is that enjoyment bit and that motivation bit. And if we can link more of the work that people do back to that purpose and motivation, the perception of workload improves. And we know this from our trust. So my starting point on all of this is about culture. And well-being is not something that a school or trust can do. Well-being is the result of everything that you do. You know, so this kind of, let's have a well-being program. I don't, you know, no issue at all with people doing yoga or having Cake Friday. But if the culture is toxic and then there's a few cakes on Friday, it's utterly pointless. So it's about all of those micro interactions. It's about how leaders behave. It's about the systems and processes that schools and trusts choose. So psychological safety and the notion of professional trust need to be at the heart of every single organization. So the culture code, Daniel Coyle's culture code, is absolutely brilliant on this. So in Teal, we put that at the heart of everything that we do. Second bit around workload, we've done loads around workload reduction. It's brilliant to hear Emma talking about this top-down thing. I criticise the DFE from time to time. I don't criticise their intention around workload reduction, but just having a list of tasks that you tick off does very little. It has to be about the context. And one of the things that I said completely inadvertently back in 2019 at a trust conference, when we'd done a whole load of stuff around workload and we were kind of relaunching and reculturing the trust, I said that we have to get to a point as a profession where we stop asking people to choose between being seen as a good teacher or a good mum or dad or sister or brother or daughter or partner or friend or whatever. And it's that, in terms of well-being, I think with teachers, it comes back to that Sunday afternoon dilemma that thousands of teachers feel. Do I sit here now and do 5 hours of work and not take my daughter to football? Because if I don't do that, then I'll be seen as a failure. That drives not only a sense of a lack of well-being, but it also drives people out of the profession. And that's just absolutely true. And that does apply to leaders as well. So, and then the other bit that I think the thing that unpicks for me, and Sufian talked about this, but that unpicks the difference between how teachers feel and how leaders feel, I do think it goes back to that Daniel Pink thing. So Daniel Pink talks about where people feel highly engaged and well in their work, they have a strong sense of three things: autonomy, mastery, and purpose. And I think about my role now as CEO and why I enjoy it so much. I have a huge amount of autonomy. So I get to decide the work that we do. I get to decide kind of how I do it. I have a strong sense of mastery, not in that I'm good at it, but as in I have multiple opportunities to develop and to network and to meet whoever I want and to read whatever I want. And then purpose, we are, you know, a purpose-driven organization, and I hold on to all the time the fact that, you know, we are here to make people's lives better. That's what we do. So part of it, I know that my well-being professionally comes from having that strong sense of autonomy, mastery, and purpose. And then you look at classroom teachers and you say, well, how much autonomy do you have if everything is scripted? You know, every single thing that you do it like this, do it like that. You have no autonomy whatsoever. Now, I'm not arguing here for, you know, going back to the 1980s and just driving in on the morning and going, what shall I teach today? But having that professional trust around how best to deliver. The mastery bit, I think, with great CPD and with stripping out a load of the nonsense that we ask people to do in schools to create time for great professional development. And then purpose, again, it goes back to that type of work. I've never met a great teacher who objects to doing quite a bit of work. What they want to do is they want to do work that feels important, and they don't want to be doing stuff and having hours and hours and hours bogged down in onerous nonsense that doesn't have any impact, or having to jump through hoops. So stuff like threshold applications and stuff like that, hours and hours and hours, old style performance management. What is the point? You know, so really thinking through those things. And then, you know, for us at Teal, we are far from perfect. If Edurio let me quote the TES wellbeing survey, I apologize for going back to a rival here, but so in the most recent TES wellbeing survey, 61% of teachers said that their workload is unmanageable. 18% say that in Teal. 85% of staff express strong satisfaction in Teal compared to 55% nationally. And we have 100% retention of ECTs. So there's loads of things we need to get better at, but this part of what we do is working really, really well. And it goes back to listening to staff. So when we constructed our workload charter, we did it with staff, and it involved me saying, you know, write down on Post-it notes stuff that we ask you to do that's pointless, that doesn't impact on young people. And if I can't justify it, then we'll get rid of it. And we got rid of loads and loads of stuff. We created an ethical leadership framework. So we're absolutely clear about how leaders are expected to behave. And if they can't or won't do that, then they have to go, I'm afraid. And we have parted company with 3 leaders who would not lead, you know, in a kind and a forgiving way, or with humility, or having a strong sense of servant leadership. They were brilliant at loads of other stuff, but their behavior was undermining well-being because it was undermining psychological safety in the organization. We've changed loads of policies, and I think there's a bit around language here that's really important. So we used to say you can go to your child's nativity. We now say you must go to your child's nativity, because when people say can in a school, or if a leader says, oh, you can go, what a lot of staff hear is, you can go if you absolutely must. Whereas if you say you must go, it's different. Similarly with flexible working, we don't expect people to come cap in hand and put in a formal request and go to the head's office to request flexible working. Every single one of our jobs is advertised as up to full time. So what that means is that every single job there is a conversation about work pattern. And every year, as part of the performance development review, there's a conversation about work patterns. So people are no longer having to go in and ask. We pay for staff prescriptions. We changed our special leave policy to make it more flexible, for example, around bereavement. So if you've got a bereavement policy that says you can have 5 days paid if you are bereaved and then you need to come back, and if you're not ready to come back, you need to go to a GP, what kind of message are we actually sending to people? As if you can put a number on how people feel after they've been bereaved. So now we say, come back when you're ready. Tell us when you're ready. Don't bother making an appointment with a GP. Tell us when you're ready to come back. And again, it's quite subtle stuff, but it's about the culture. And then the last bit really is about, in terms of leadership, is we've removed a lot of the kind of macho barriers around leadership. So my heart sinks when I hear, school SLTs starting at 7:30 in the morning or going on till 6:30 at night. A, it's pointless, and B, who does it impact the most? It impacts people with young families, and it deters them from going into those roles. So, one of our positions at Teal is we are absolutely determined that nobody ever has to compromise on professional promotion and development through the profession because of the fact that they have a family or a young family. And that idea that you step out and then when you come back in, a load of other people have gone past you and you have to kind of restart. We've got to get away from that. And just having that culture. So I think, all of those things are part of it. So reducing workload, definitely yes, but doing it in a culture. And I will round it off by coming back to another Edurio survey, just so that I'm being loyal. I can't remember what the survey is called. It might be the wellbeing, the one that came out last week. It's all about retention and risk of resignation. But the one last year, and it talks about the risk of resignation. I know we're getting onto retention here rather than wellbeing, but there's a point. The risk of resignation is driven by where people feel workload is unmanageable, where people feel unappreciated by leaders, and where leadership communication to staff is poor. And that was in the survey last year. It's repeated this year. So getting leaders to focus on those 3 areas there, because we have to get to a point where, the leadership data is not great in the survey, is it? But it's better than teachers. So we need to change leadership behaviors, system structures, and cultures, so that whatever benefits we have as leaders, that means that our well-being is better. We have to make sure that that's passed on and available to all staff. And that whole thing is about culture, flexibility, and professional trust.
Thank you ever so much. I'm going to dive straight into the second section, because I'm noting we've got 12 minutes left of the of this hour. But one thing I'm going to just throw out as a question I'm going to put to the 3 of you at the end is, any wellbeing strategies that you've seen or kind of activities that you've seen that you would very much not recommend that anybody goes and takes in their school? I'm going to come back to that one at the end, but I'll quickly run through the second half of the data, because this looks at hopefully you can see that now. This looks at wellbeing and protected characteristics. The full data in the report is worth a look through. We have support from the people on the line, but also from Black Men Teach, from neuro teachers, from diverse educators, and from Pride and Progress. There's a load of great data in the report that looks at this in much more detail. But I'm briefly going to run through 3 characteristics. I'm going to look at age, parental status, and disability, and then we'll come back for a discussion. So looking at age again, this is the one chart that's not organised from most positive to least positive group, because we thought it was more sensible to organise it in kind of increasing age buckets. But throughout the wellbeing measures, we can see that those in the 25 to 34 year old age group have the lowest levels of wellbeing. In the interest of time, I'm not going to read out each slide. I'm just going to flick through and say, look at the green bars, but the 25 to 34 second bar here, the lowest group, often followed by 35 to 44 year olds, most stressed, most overworked, and towards the bottom of feeling excited by the work that they do. So this age group here, this kind of 25 to 34 year olds, lowest well-being, and there is something going on with that age group. When we look at parents, apologies, that is the wrong graph. When we look at parents, we see some quite interesting data. I think everybody that we have spoken to, whether they're a parent or not, was expecting to see that parents are more stressed, more anxious, more overworked than others. But the only measure that we have where parents have lower well-being than non-parents is sleep quality. Actually, for stress levels, for overall well-being, for levels of overwork, and for feeling excited about work, those who aren't parents reported less positive results than those who are parents. And this is something that Emma and I will have a chat about in a moment. And finally, when we look at disability, there were really, really stark differences. This was the area across the survey where we saw the biggest differences between the marginalised group and the majority group. Those who aren't disabled reported significantly higher well-being across the board than those who are disabled, and those who are disabled also significantly less excited by the work that they're doing as well. So really whistle-stop tour through the data so that we can carry on with the conversation, but just as a summary, those in the kind of 25 to 34 year old age group, lowest well-being, with well-being improving as people get older. Those who are parents, so reporting higher levels of well-being for all measures apart from sleep quality, and those who are disabled reporting much less well-being than those who aren't disabled. And what I want to do is we will talk with Emma about parenthood, because this is Emma's area of specialism, and I'm going to share some thoughts from Katrina, who is from Neuro Teachers and helped us with the report, but couldn't make the session today. But I want to just before we dive into the specific groups, I want to just ask Jonny, Sufian, anything that you can say around a wellbeing approach that takes into account kind of marginalised groups, make sure that no one is kind of left behind.
I would say probably the most important piece of work around looking at including people, whether that's parents, flexible working, whether that's looking at people with protected characteristics in any shape or form, is going back to the values and moral purpose piece of work, but doing it in an authentic, genuine manner where you actually want to make a difference. So for us, it's been about, right, before we start throwing things at people that are gimmicks of like, we're going to introduce these perks, we've got to understand what people actually feel, what they want, what they need. And for us to do that, we've got to listen to our people, we've got to talk to our people, and we've got to listen to some of the more difficult conversations about what it feels like working for us, what it feels like being an employee with us. And those aren't always the greatest soundbite conversations. Those are difficult conversations. Finding those ardent critics in schools that are bringing the morale down, perhaps for even others, because they're so disgruntled and unhappy about certain things that we do. But so capturing the voice of the people, but then capturing the voice of all stakeholders for us is really important, because what our governors, leaders, support staff, families, parents, communities say about us is really important. And I think once you get that piece right, at the heart of that undoubtedly, in most organizations, you will find the words belonging and inclusivity will come up, because deep down, we all want to belong. We all want to be included. And when you have that, you create a culture, and the culture is the biggest gift we can give for well-being. It's better than anything that you can try as a silver bullet fix for the system. Change the culture, because when people feel they belong, no amount of money can improve a sense of belonging. It doesn't matter how much I get paid, but when I turn up to conferences that don't reflect where I don't belong, even if I was paid to attend that conference, even if I had the comfiest seat in the room, even if I had the best lunch, it doesn't matter. If I don't feel like I belong, I don't feel like I belong. And that happens in workplaces day in, day out, because of the way we make people feel. So for me, it's about focus on improving the culture, because that's the greatest gift you can give your people. If you live it and don't just laminate it, make those values count, and live and breathe those values every day, because that will make people feel included from marginalized, from minoritized communities.
Thank you, Sufian. Jonny, anything to add or agreement?
I mean, I met Sufian for the first time face to face yesterday, but I feel like I've known him for a long time. He's one of those people where every single person talks about him and goes, he's brilliant. And that says why that answer is just absolutely spot on. I think in this area here, I'm kind of the opposite of the poster boy, aren't I? I'm a white, middle-aged, middle-class man. But I think the thing that Sufian said there about listening and hearing people and not shying away from it, not saying, well, I'm a white man, so I feel a bit uncomfortable about having these conversations, but actually just, listening, that sense of belonging. Like every single person who works in Teal, I want them to have an equal sense of, this is my place and this is where I should be, and this is I don't want to be too cheesy, this is my family, and that can only come from treating people as individuals and meeting them where they are, rather than telling them where you think they should be.
Thank you. And Emma, we are rapidly running out of time, but I want to give the parental discussion the kind of as much time as we can. As I sort of shared the data, I think it was a surprise to you, it was a surprise to me, it was a surprise to everybody that we've kind of spoken to. Can you share a little bit around what you think could be underlying that data? And I know you've got a huge range of great resources to kind of signpost people to, either kind of to pop in the chat to look into afterwards, or we can share them beyond. But yeah, over to you to kind of talk about that really, really interesting nugget of insight that we found here.
Yeah, firstly, a big thank you, which I told you when we've spoken previously, Iona. This is one of the only reports I've seen that actually breaks down by parental status, which is pretty nuts. The school workforce census, for example, doesn't collect parenting data. When we ask trusts how many staff they currently have on maternity leave, they don't always know. When we make freedom of information requests to local authorities about how many staff they have on maternity leave currently or historically, they say that we don't hold that data. You need to ask at individual school level across our 365 schools within our local authority. So actually, part of the importance of even just breaking down this data by parenting is that it's actually filling a data gap that's existed for a very long time, and didn't actually start getting filled until the MTPT project turned up on the scene, and I started doing studies with a tiny baby attached to me. I'm rocking up at the DFE and pointing out all these flaws, again, with a tiny baby attached to me. So that's really important. And actually, the more we do look into it, the more we are discovering about the parent-teacher community that we didn't know, and more that we're maybe busting some of the anecdotes that we're seeing or hearing about from those disgruntled members of staff that Sufian talked about, or from maybe the critics. And it is really, really encouraging to see that actually we've got solid data to suggest that teaching can be a really, really family-friendly career choice when things are going right. But I think what's interesting to me there is the concept of perspective. So again, this is anecdotal. We don't necessarily have the data to suggest this concretely, but the idea that when you become a parent, all those minutiae of my board and my display don't look right, and I'm having, you know, real anxiety or dreams about the font on my PowerPoints are no longer important. Or the idea of I need to spend 7 hours on my Sunday planning or marking. It's like, you know what, that can wait, and I really don't care, because what's more important right now is to go to the park with my child, and that then just feeds into positive well-being of being outside and being with community and being with family and those sorts of things that we associate with parenting. So as stressful as early parenting can be, and many of us have lived and breathed having small children and babies who don't sleep at home, actually becoming a parent gives you a higher purpose in life, arguably, than maybe you have had before. And I think that creates balance, that forces balance when it is supported organisationally. When it's not supported organisationally, it forces choice, and often the choice is either to go to a school that does support that balance or to leave the profession entirely. And I think the age tables that you showed there were also really interesting. Makes a lot of sense to me that sort of colleagues in their 20s are stressed because they don't know what they're doing. There are so many opportunities for failure. Life is hard as an inexperienced teacher, particularly if you're changing schools following your training year, or finding new positions, or going for promotion, and therefore sort of going into new contexts constantly. And actually that stability that often happens in your mid-30s, when you get really good at your job, you potentially stay for longer in one school because you're tied to the area, because you are paying your mortgage or paying your childcare fees, or have your children in schools nearby. Stability breeds positive well-being, right? And you feel good at your job, you feel like you know what you're doing. So those age statistics don't surprise me at all. But what is interesting is that 34-year-old cutoff point is also the age that teachers are most likely to become mothers for the first time. So there's something there around that pivot point of the early to mid-30s becoming that make or break moment of whether teaching is going to be a profession that is sustained, or whether that's the dropout point. And that's definitely something that we see with the school's workforce data, is that women aged 30 to 39 are the largest demographic to leave teaching every year in numbers figures. And yet we know so little about how much the motherhood penalty is impacting that. And what we do know comes from the MTPT project. It makes a lot of sense. It's fascinating. And there are such obvious solutions to support teachers when they become parents, particularly when they become mothers. But because we don't necessarily have the data, or we don't have the coverage on the data, because we don't break everything else down by parenthood in order to join the dots in the way that Edurio have done here, we can't necessarily justify the cost often of investing in those solutions.
Thanks. Yeah, and one thing that is interesting, and one thing that we haven't had time to go into today, but I think the intersectionality of different elements is something that is really, really vital for us to look at next. As this is our first year asking these questions, we're not yet at a position where the data set is large enough to enable us to look in too much depth at combined characteristics. But one thing that I did have a look at was to see that around the age and parenthood question, is it as simple as it does one of those describe the other one? Is it because this younger age group are more stressed that parents are less stressed? Is it because once you become a parent you stop being stressed? That and it looks like that's not the case. So that younger age group, regardless of parental status, more stressed than older age groups, regardless of parental status. But I do think that something we need to get into more, and as the data set grows and grows, which it is bigger now than it was when we sort of ran this analysis a couple of months ago, will enable us to do that kind of more in-depth analysis and look at that intersectionality in more depth. I'm noting that we have run over by 3 minutes, and Imanta is getting ready to run the next session on leadership. But I want to just give a huge thank you to Emma, to Sufian, and to Jonny for joining us, to everybody who contributed to the report, Black Men Teach, Diverse Educators, Pride and Progress, Neuro Teachers, and yeah, thank you all for listening. Do stick around as we chat leadership next. But yeah, I'll hand over